who these people were, that they weren't just a bunch of outsiders that, were problems. It really, not only, and of course our guys, when there were not things going on in camp on the weekend, would go to the local communities, which of course wasn't necessarily received real well by some of the other younger guys that were in those communities. Sometimes those younger guys in those communities were known to set forest fires to make sure that the enrollees would not have an opportunity that weekend to drop by. So, you always got to kind of look at the whole picture before you kind of think everything's real simple. And then this is a picture that actually we got back through the Smokies Historical Society when we asked for any stories or pictures of, and this is actually, of course, Ty Phillips of Cosby, Tennessee, great uncle of Phyllis Benton. I met Phyllis, she's actually was out at the booth yesterday, a real wonderful gal, and this is how they actually got some of their dental activities resolved. So that was a hands-on, to put it mildly, but really interesting. Nationally, there was a paper called the Happy Days. The charge of this was 5 cents. It was a weekly thing. It had columns, of course, in it, and some of which were called brass hats. The chaplain comments, the company commander usually had, some comments. And one of the things that they did, because they encouraged the individual camps to set up their own papers, they started evaluating the individual camp papers. They would rate them on a scale. And one of the other things Happy Days did, they actually gave little rewards. They gave $5 for any poems that they printed, or $1 for any inventions or suggestions that led to improvements in camps. And they also had various other columns like how to job interview. As I say, if these people could get a job, then that was the whole goal, let's get them out and we'll talk. There are many skills that were picked up. And they also, Happy Days wrote about how to start a company paper, because of course the ones that had, very young, unsophisticated enrollees didn't have much experience to be able to start a paper, so Happy Days assisted with that process. Here's some cartoons, which basically pins down the likes of the typical enrollee, which appear to be ladies, good food, and counting their money, which probably, with what they were doing and working their tails off, makes a lot of sense. So life got simpler. But here's one of the psalms of the CCC, which the Happy Days ended up paying for. The CCC is my restoration. I shall not want, but it maketh me arise early in the morning. It giveth me baths with hard water. It restoreth my appetite. It leads me in the paths of work for my bankroll's sake. Yea, though oft do I do KP duty from morn to night, I will fear no evil, for the infirmary is near me. The oils and the pills, they discomfort me. Tables are prepared for me in the presence of my buddies. My plate is heaped up, and my stomach all but runneth over. Surely gold-breaking and tree nursing shall not follow me all the days of my life, but I shall probably remain in the CCC forever. So clearly it impacted them. Here's some of the CCC newspapers in the park. Greenbrier was called the Pinnacle Echo. Cosby had one called the Smokescreen. Tremont had one, Smoky Mountain Echo. Big Creek had the Big Creek Splash. Smokemont had the Smoky Eagle and Rolling Bones. Cades Cove had the Cades Cove Courier, the Cades Cove Clock, and the Cades Cove Crusader, which is our little picture over there on the left. And what the papers covered is their sporting results, their work projects completed, the camp officer changes, which sometimes were frequent, individual junior tidbits, what they were up to, because usually each of the 5, what you could call dorms, had their own writer, and he was responsible for submitting something. And then they also, of course, covered upcoming events. And then to sort of get even with Happy Days, the local papers often started rating Happy Days. So it's like, okay, what's good for the goose? Friendships, of course, many of these existed well beyond their years. because clearly, you know, when you're there for, as I say, a minimum of 6 months up to 2 years, and then there were exceptions if you had, you know, skills but didn't end up with a job. You could, you know, some of them ended up with 3 or 4 years. But clearly, you know, lifelong type things. And of course there was a little fun that was had, as guys do have to find some ways to. Here's a shot of one of the campus open houses. And as I say, I'm sure there were a fair number of weddings that took place based on some of the folks that got met. Work projects, yes, of course. We keep talking, it's the park, well, here we go. Rock quarry work, yes, this was serious stuff. Not exactly one of the popular jobs is to, you know, go carve on rocks, because of course they really didn't have a lot of protective equipment. And they're basically just banging away on it, which, you know, I mean, it requires a skill, there's no question, but it's really hard work. And some of the guys got sort of overwhelmed and decided enough is enough and said goodbye after some of that activity. Here's one of the limbs instructing them on, you know, how not only to cut the stone, but also how to, you know, build retaining walls and bridges, and it's incredible, because yeah, if you ever see a stone structure in this park, I mean, you can almost take it to the bank. That's CCC stuff, and there's a lot of them all over on the roads. And here's the biggest bridge, which is the one in Altamont. If you're going down to the Little River Trail, before you get to the trailhead, you go over a bridge, which you usually don't pay much attention to, but this is a 4-arch bridge. It's the largest arch bridge in the park. That's the bridge that you're going over. That's one of their notable achievements. Here's in Cataloochee, not a great shot, but showing the road work that had to be done. Matter of fact, I bet you I know where that is. That's that road that goes over to Cataloochee, which has, you know, not exactly been improved a lot when all said and done. And it's sort of deliberate, apparently, from my talk with the park folks. Here's a little better shot. This is over in Cades Cove, which makes a little more sense because the land's a little flatter. And of course they had, you know, various equipment pieces, and here's over, it's a gate and a road over in Deep Creek. A lot of folks from this area don't particularly get over there, but it's an interesting area to get to. And then these are some of the guardrails that I was talking about, which, you know, I mean, those things are individually carved, folks, and so clearly masonry skills were picked up along with a lot of forestry skills. Here's another little activity that was kind of important. With 300,000 acres kind of destroyed in a temperate rainforest environment, we need to replace the trees. So they started nurseries. The largest one was Ravensford, which is of course over in North Carolina. Here's some of the, not the greatest shot, but some of the plantings, because they often use the seeds from the area, and then of course, you know, have their nurseries. And here's a little better shot of some of the initial activities. So everything that you see in this park is basically a result of this process. And of course, one thing we've left out is fish. Trout fishing, they had various rearing pools, including there's one out of Chimney Tops. And here's how they transported the trout after they put them in those little containers and said, guess where we're going? We're going out to the stream. So they stocked them. And here's something the Smokies was often criticized for, is having too many moonshiners. Well, of course, while they're out, you know, checking out what's in the park, found more than a fair number of stills. And in this case, many of them ended up over at the Greenbrier camp in 1935, and they actually used these abandoned stills for scrap metal. So they were involved in various projects that were intriguing. And of course, anybody that's done many of the trails knows there's a lot of footbridges out there. The really significant ones were initially put in as part of the trail system. They did about 500 of the 800 miles of the trails in the park. And of course, you know, with all the streams that exist, some pretty serious ones that you need some heavy-duty bridges set up for. Here's the one that goes over Husky Branch out there in the Altamont area, which is a little river cuts off into Husky Branch. And of course, this slash cleanup, wow. Talk about tricky stuff on the side of a mountain, where you can trip pretty easy while you're bending over to try to clean things up. This was really laborious type efforts, to put it mildly. And here's work on the Bullhead Trail, which recently the Friends of the Smokies has worked on. Because basically, not only for the rock quarry work, but also for some of the trail work, they use dynamite. And there were almost no serious accidents, but it gives you the idea of how difficult this environment is to kind of put trails in. Here's part of the Bullhead Trail, and you can see when a trail is put in right, it's nice and wide, and it's got a nice firm look to it, even though you're right next to a major rock formation here. And according to the things that I've read about the Smokies, the hardest trail for them to do was actually the Trillian Gap Trail, which right now the Park Service is going to start their work on May the 13th, I believe it is, and close it down from Monday through Thursday, much like they've done with some of the other trails going up to Mount Con. Amos Reagan, that fellow that we showed earlier, he was actually the limb that was responsible for not only the Trillian Trail to be put in, but the Laurel Falls Trail, which is probably, if not the most popular, within the top two. And here's a shot from the Laurel Falls Trail looking over towards Blanket Mountain. Here's a CCC restroom there at the Chimney Tops picnic area, real pretty picnic area to go to. As I say, if you see a rock structure in this park, the crew will take it to the bank. The one on the left is called Mount Kepler, which is my favorite hike in the entire park. The one on the right is Mount Sterling. There were 12 different fire towers that were built in the park. Most of them were more like Mount Sterling. Mount Kepler is that way because it sits right on the top of the ridge, and that other structure would not, be able to handle that weather when all is said and done. And actually, we'll go on to the next one here. Whoops. Yeah, you can just barely see it. And the reason I put this in there is there was actually a Caretaker Cabin during different times of the year, namely from February the 15th through May the 15th was perceived as the fire time, and October the 15th through December the 15th. And the CCC guys were actually the guys that were the caretakers. Here's a boulder, which, what did you put boulder in here? What is that an accomplishment of? Well, it turns out it's in a cemetery in Bryson City. Now, anybody that's been in that cemetery probably knows what that boulder is. That's a boulder for Horace Kepler, often referred to as the father of the Smokies. And that was a tribute by the Park Service to everything that this guy did that helped create this as a national park. Of course, he was quite an outdoorsman. And then our next little event is the Rockefeller Memorial Park dedication in 1940. It became a park in 34, but it was 1940 before it was dedicated by FDR. One of the things that just kind of enamored me a bit was from the Sugarlands Visitor Center all the way up to Newfound Gap, which of course is where the Rockefeller Memorial is, every 270 feet, the CCC enrollees were saluting as the president went by. And he did not refer to them during the dedication because, of course, he had another little thing on his mind of what was going on across the seas, which, of course, led to World War II. Here's a shot, and actually, interesting to think about this, they parked the vehicles primarily along the Clingman's Dome Road and the Clingman's Dome parking lot, 7 miles away. There was such a crowd up there. Here's a shot of FDR. Of course, which most people didn't realize, his physical situation, and they deliberately tried to keep that, kind of covered even while this ceremony was going on. But in 2009, there was a 75-year anniversary celebration, which Dolly Parton was the ambassador. And these two fellows here, Charles Fletcher and Clarence Allison, are enrollees that were still alive at that point in time. And Fletcher, by the way, was from Gastonia, North Carolina. One story about him that intrigued me was the superintendent picked him up after he had spent 1 week on the job, and he was on one of those rock crews, and said, "This is not for me." He had cuts, he had abrasions, he had things hitting him all the time while he was chipping away on these rocks, and said, "The heck with this." And as he was leaving the park and got outside the park, he was picked up by Ross Eakin, who he didn't know who Ross Eakin was at that stage, but he told him that it hadn't gone well, and Ross said, "I'm the park superintendent, and if you come back, I think we can find you a better job." And he did. And he ended up being the office assistant and then the superintendent's chauffeur later on. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting the way the thing sort of balances there. You never quite know. So our next little shot is Dolly, who sang "My Mountains, My Home, and Forever Home." And of course, as anybody from this area knows, and even those of us from Ohio know, wow, what a gal. They built the Smokies. This is actually the park headquarters. They actually built the foundation there. The firm that ended up building the rest of it actually hired many of the CCC employees to build the rest of it. And then if you've ever been behind the building, there's a big garage back there. That garage was actually built by the CCC. It's a big rock structure. So what did they accomplish? Okay, well, here's one of the things. One of the things they did is they built that Allen Cave trail, and Wiley Oakley was actually a lamb at one stage that helped tell them where Arch Rock was. And this is a picture of the opening before you get into Arch Rock. Here's part of the Appalachian Trail there up at Newfound Gap that immediately goes up. And they were obviously rather significantly involved in that. This is part of the Albright Grove Trail, which has the oldest trees in the park, which is out off the Modern Ball Trail out, east of town before you get to Cosby. Here's the Kepler Prom Trail, which is, of course, named after Horace, and that's where one of the campsites was. And here's some of the memorabilia that still exists right off the trail there, that 2-mile trail that goes up to the campsite. And actually what that is a chimney, a water fountain, and the camp signpost. They actually helped with the preservation of the Davis farmhouse, which was later moved to the Oconaluftee center there, and now it's part of that farm museum. And there's actually a barn, a spring house, and a blacksmith shop that are part of that. That's a nice setup over there. Mingus Mill was restored. That's the one that's just up from the visitor center over to Oconaluftee. This, of course, was a grist mill that was used to grind up the corn into cornmeal. And of course, the old wonderful open cove was deliberately set up by the park at that stage. They kept debating what to do with the cove, and clearly they determined that this was an area that they wanted to keep as a farm-like setting, and they've obviously accomplished their objective, but the CCC was the one that originally helped get it back to sort of this open area down at the bottom of the cove. This is, of course, Abrams Falls. They do, of course, the trail out there, one of the most popular hikes, often called a family hike. It's not an easy one, but it's well worth the trouble to get out there. Here's the, out in the cove, the Whitehead Cabin. It was put up in 1898. It's the only cabin left with square solid logs and a brick chimney. so it's a little different. The fellow built it for his wife, who was actually a grocery